we had the G7 in Italy, and they were discussing many issues. But when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, they're trying to send the Russian assets, these Russian assets that are in the hand of the Europeans and the United States, to help Ukraine. How did you find this policy? Do you think at the end of the day, the other European countries would let them to do that?
Well, I think that they're in a position to do it, except that it will be suicidal. I think that they are doing it, and the way that it's been arranged is essentially the Europeans are going to guarantee the funds. They're going to be sending them to the United States to dispose of. The United States is going to dispose of the funds, but the Europeans are going to be on the hook to guarantee the funds. I think it's an absolutely surreal arrangement. It's obviously illegal. It's going to send a very strong message to the whole rest of the world that you cannot do business with these people. And I think it's going to cost extraordinarily dearly to the Europeans, but ultimately to the Americans as well, because they will break the one important foundation that they have built for their global hegemony, and that is the trust of the people that they do business with. Because they manage the world through these vassals and subservient regime that at least have to think that when they make a deal with the Belgians, with the ECB, with the Americans, that the deal is going to hold and that they're going to be able to keep their money and use their money. This is now telling them, well, like if we don't like the likes of you, we can just take your money and we will. And we don't care about the laws and we don't care about the agreements. We're just going to do whatever is expedient for us to do. So this apparently is what is happening today. I think in a way, because it is so illegal, immoral, and self-destructive and counterproductive. It reflects a certain desperation on the part of the Western leaders, and that is the sign that they are aware that they're losing this battle, and that they are resorting to desperate measures.
Yeah. When you look at these, we know that we had a peace summit in Switzerland, and at the same before this summit happening, we had putting out some preconditions for any sort of peace talks with the Europeans together with the United States and Ukraine. But it doesn't seem that in the European Union, in the United States, anybody is considering any sort of political settlement, considering the conflict in Ukraine. What's in it, in your opinion, in the continuation of this conflict in Ukraine? Why the European Unions, together with the United States, are so eager to continue this war?
I think that they cannot accept defeat. I think that we will look back on this weekend as an inflection point in the current conflict. And I think that we always have to remember what the conflict is, because it's not, the war between Russia and Ukraine is just a proxy for the conflict. The real conflict is what George Soros spelled out in his May 2021 address to the World Economic Forum in Davos, in which he said that this is a conflict between two systems of governance. And then George Soros went to explain that it's between the open societies and the closed societies, where the open societies are liberal democracies in the West and the closed societies are the dictatorships and tyrannies in the East. But the reality is that this is a conflict between Western oligarchic, imperialistic, colonial powers versus the whole rest of humanity, including the people who live in the Western liberal democracies. And so today, this war is being fought by proxy in Ukraine. The oligarchies in the West are realizing that they're losing this war, and now they have to give themselves a new lease of life, because this is existential. Vladimir Putin on Friday gave a speech in which he spelled out Russia's conditions for cessation, ceasefire, and then negotiation of for the cessation of the of the conflict. I think that he deliberately made the offer quite generous and reasonable because he could count on his Western counterparts that they would reject it. I think that the Russians knew. And of course, it was rejected immediately by Jens Stoltenberg and by US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. And the day later, when the peace summit in Switzerland started, they had time to write nice speeches about it. And we saw the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, deliver this solemn speech about freedom and peace and territorial integrity and all these beautiful things. Except that same Kaja Kallas, exactly a month ago today, on 18th May, was hosting the I forget the name of the conference, but it was a conference in Tallinn with a security conference. And she said at that same speech exactly the opposite of what she was saying this weekend. She was talking about how the war in Ukraine would end with Russia's defeat, and that after the war, that Russia would be broken up into a number of smaller nations. And so you see, they don't even keep the same message. For one audience, they talk about territorial integrity and sovereignty of nations. For a different audience, they talk about breaking up Russia. People like Stoltenberg and Kallas and Lloyd Austin and Antony Blinken, I don't hear them as people who speak in their own names based on their own principles and ideas. I think that the script is written for them by their political patrons and their donors and sponsors. And you will notice that they're all saying the same things, essentially. And I think that what they are reflecting is their total commitment to war and their obsession with destroying and breaking up Russia. And they will persist in this at all cost. So I think that given that they rejected Vladimir Putin's offer, I think that over the coming weeks and months during the summer, I think that the conflict will probably escalate in ways that we probably cannot envision at the moment, but I fear that they will try everything, including possibly a false flag attack somewhere in Europe, maybe Poland, maybe Germany, maybe Romania, Moldova, who knows? And that they will attempt to galvanize the West to unite and to confront Russia as a united front. I don't think that this will work, but they might try. And at the same time, I think that if the West rejects Russia's offer, that Russia will probably go to round out the whole Ukrainian coast of the Black Sea, which means taking over Odessa, that they will take Kharkov. And very possibly they might even take Kiev, which will leave whatever's left of Ukraine an impoverished, destroyed rump statelet that's landlocked, and that will be left as an object for European powers to bicker about and to rescue economically, because there's going to be millions of potential migrants that might go from the rump Ukraine to the Western European nations, particularly Poland, will be at risk.
Yeah. I think the points that you've mentioned, that these conditions are so logic and based on the reality on the ground right now. But the other point would be, as time goes by, Russia would go further and further, would take Odessa, Nikolaev, even goes to Kiev. How about, do you think that if Russia takes these cities, or do you see any sort of possibility in the future that if something happens in the United States, the political party is changing their policies, they replace the Zelensky administration with a new administration, I don't know, an election in Ukraine, do you think that Russia would negotiate on Let us assume Odessa and Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, these cities that are so important right now. Or Russia, if Russia takes these cities, these cities would not be negotiable.
I think this would be very difficult to predict, but my guess would be that the Russians will negotiate, because, Russians don't need to take Odessa, Kharkov, Nikolaev, Kiev by force. It is enough for them to impose an armistice on their terms, and to make sure that whatever government takes over in Kiev is favorable to cooperating with Russia, which means that they would probably be able to send their own people into these cities, that they would conduct their investigations of how the war was cooked up, the war crimes that were perpetrated by the Kiev regime, and to clean it up, because, to start with, Ukraine, and particularly places like Odessa and Kharkov and Nikolaev, were already largely pro-Russian to begin with. So it would be the question of setting all that back into its place, and then integrating Ukraine into, the larger envisioned project, which is Russia's Belt and Road Initiative, the customs unions that Russia has with countries like Belarus, and in that case, they do not have to take Odessa or any other place by force. They can simply control it politically. And I think that this would satisfy Russians' objectives and security needs, and they would expunge the Western influence from Ukraine. So I think that negotiating would be the lower cost solution to this conflict. And I think that, watching how Russians do things, they tend to explore the low cost solution before they will expand, military material and their soldiers' lives on military conquests.
It seems that they know, at the end of the day, they know they have to find a political settlement for the conflict in Ukraine. But the question is why they don't do this right now. How the European Union, how these European countries would benefit from this conflict? We have new elections in the European Union right now. It seems that they're talking about that people are changing from left wing to the right wing. All these stories, we know that people are not happy with the situation. It's not about the left wing and right wing, but it seems to me that the European leaders are trying to distract their people from by the conflict in Ukraine. They're saying the problem is in Ukraine. What we're witnessing right now is not anything related to our policies or domestic policies. It's all about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. And we have to unite, we have to fight, we have to help Ukraine. And why they're doing this? Do you think that their political position is in risk? That's why they're doing this?
Yes, I think that their political position is at risk, and we saw that in the recent elections for the European Parliament. It was very clear that this wasn't, the vote wasn't between left and right. The vote was almost exactly along the lines of Europe's conflict with Russia. So all the parties that are in favor of war, Macron's parties, Scholz's parties, the Greens, they all lost, and they lost bad. And all the parties that are talking about peace, about making some kind of an arrangement with Russia, parties that are against war, against sending troops to Ukraine, against sending military aid and money to Ukraine, they all won. Giorgia Meloni is a very right-wing prime minister in Italy. She's a member of all these Atlanticist associations, but she was consistent against sending troops to Ukraine, and against sending money to Ukraine and guaranteeing loans and so forth. And she even had a very public disagreement about this with French President Emmanuel Macron. And she, in spite of the fact that she's very right-wing, and at the same time very subservient to the European Central Bank and to Brussels, nevertheless, she kept a large majority, and she was the winner of those elections. Whereas, other right-wing leaders took a big beating because they are gung-ho on going to Ukraine, helping Ukraine. So I think that the European population has spoken very loud and very clear. And I think that all these, the whole political class who's gotten mixed up with the war in Ukraine, they have no future. And so continuing the war is their way of preserving their power and their relevance. And I think that so long as the war lasts, there's this, sense of emergency that kind of gives them power and relevance. And then, maybe they can finagle something for themselves. Otherwise, I think that they are destined for the dustbin of history.
If you remember last time we talked, I asked you if Turkey wants to join BRICS, what would that mean for NATO? And how about Europe? How do you see, is that going to happen to Europe and Serbia? How about Hungary? How about these countries who are not happy with the current situation, who cannot express, because within the European Union, they cannot influence anything, any sort of these decisions that are happening right now in Ukraine, in the foreign policy of the European Union. But if they join BRICS, they would be much more influential.
Yes, I think that the EU will fracture inevitably, and I think that we can already see signs of NATO fracturing as we speak. Because they started off 2.5 years ago proclaiming how united they are and how this war has brought them all closer together and all these wonderful things. But we see today that there's a lot of differences between them, and Viktor Orban of Hungary has explicitly said, we did not join the EU to go to war. And he said that Hungary will not be sending troops or weapons to Ukraine. We had the same in Slovakia with Robert Fico. And I mean, that could be part of the reason why they attempted to take his life as well. We know that there are rumblings in Romania and Bulgaria that people are not happy with the prospect of going to fight a war for Ukraine. And the people of Poland as well are very much fed up, and the Germans. So the whole military alliance is, maybe tight at the top of the pyramid of the command and control structures, but I think that it's fracturing. The lower you go in the hierarchy, the more people are not interested in this anymore. And the European Union itself, it's a very incoherent union. It's a very undemocratic union. Again, at the bottom, from the grassroots, people do not think much of it. I think that most people don't care to be part of the European Union. I think that people are longing for the days when their nationhood meant something, when their political leadership was accountable to them. And so I think that we're going to be seeing more and more populist movements pulling away. And then again, a lot will have to do with the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. And I think that once Russia has defeated Ukraine, which is, it's coming, it's a matter of time, I think that the nations that are sitting along the Danube, being, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Austria, they will no longer be landlocked nations. Okay, Romania and Bulgaria are not, but there's a number of their landlocked nations in the Central Europe that will have an out through Danube to the Black Sea and to the global commerce. And it will become a lot more interesting for them to join with the Belt and Road Initiative We know already that the Chinese, when the new political settlement is reached in Ukraine, that they are ready to come in with very large investments, because that's part of the whole global trade between East and West, and between, the Middle East and India, and Northeast and Central Europe. And so this will become an area rich with development and commerce and credit and investment. And so I think that the many of these Central European nations will start to gravitate towards these development, because it will be simply interesting from them, from the commercial point of view and from the economic point of view. And Europe will not have an answer for them other than coercion, blackmail, and things that they're doing now. European Union owes money to Hungary, but they are conditioning paying out these billions of euros on Hungary removing their objection to sending military aid to Ukraine. So it's a club that nobody wants to be in anymore, or at least many nations don't want to be part of that club anymore. And again, the closer you go down the hierarchy to the grassroots, the less commitment you have. So I think inevitably it will be falling apart.
Yeah. And when it comes to what has happened in the Middle East, we know that Turkey said that is not interested in fighting Russia if NATO decides to do that. And right after that, we've learned that they want to join BRICS. And Turkey is a very interesting country, in my opinion. It's so similar to what India does in their interest. They're trying to play both ways, with the West, with the BRICS, but at the end of the day, we know the public opinion in Turkey is so much important, is so much crucial for the future of the political leaders in Turkey. That's why Erdogan is making some political moves to just convince the public opinion. Do you see what is happening right now in Turkey would be of concern for NATO and especially for the United States?
Yes, I think that this is a matter of very grave concern to the NATO, because Turkey was supposed to be part of the anti-Russia coalition when the war in Ukraine started. And this was being orchestrated by the British. I think that at the time, the British ambassador to Turkey was a former head of the MI6, and he was trying to influence Turkish leadership to join Ukraine's war against Russia. And you might remember in the beginnings of the war in February 22, you had the head of one of the right-wing militias, C14, give like a press briefing in Odessa, and he was talking about the great coalition that was going to consist of Great Britain, Poland, Ukraine, and Turkey against Russia. And in the beginning, the Turks did provide some military aid to Ukraine, their Bayraktar drones and so forth. But I think that the Russian diplomacy has played that very, very well, and they have in fact discouraged Turkey from taking part in that war, and they have encouraged Turkey to do business with Russia with their Turkish Stream pipeline, with building nuclear power stations. One of the most important industries in Turkey is tourism, and the Russians are one of the biggest clients in that sense to Turkey. So, Russians were careful not to destroy that relationship, and they basically followed Abraham Lincoln's dictum that the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him into your friend. And then in the aftermath of this, because when when the Western powers saw that they didn't have such a reliable ally in Erdogan, they tried to stage a coup against him and to remove him from power. And again, it was Vladimir Putin who saved him, who alerted the Turks that there was an impending coup attempt. So, between commercial interests and geopolitical interests, I think that Turkey probably has a lot more to gain by joining Russia, China, and the BRICS alliance than by playing favorites with the West, because the West has less and less and less to offer, not just to Turkey, but to Saudi Arabia, to India, to even to Philippines. You see that the Philippines are realizing that they're being pushed into a war against China, and they don't really want to have a war with China. The Saudi Arabia just declined to extend the petrodollar agreement that they've had in place for the last 50 years. So I think that on all fronts, the West is on the back foot. Things are not looking good, and I think that the Russians and the Chinese are not going to stop halfway. By which I mean they're not going to necessarily continue their fight against the West by military means, but they will definitely continue to press on by through legal and diplomatic means.
Yeah. We've learned that Financial Times reported that Russia overtook the United States as gas supplier to Europe in May. In this difficult situation right now, they try to do everything to not letting Russia being part of suppliers of Europe, main suppliers of Europe. We know that Russia is overtaking the United States easily. And on the other hand, we know that in Turkey, they're thinking of being a energy hub and sending this coming from Russia and sending to Europe. That would be huge for Turkey and what their role in the future and how they can change the prices, they can manipulate them, they can do everything with this gas coming from Russia to Turkey. And we know that the future of the Nord Stream pipeline it's nobody, in my opinion, that's gone for the time being. It doesn't seem that the United States would let Germany to again receive anything from Russia because they did it on purpose. That's why they won't let Germany to connect this line again. Here comes the role of Turkey and what Turkey wants to represent as a political, as a player, important player in all these issues. And in your opinion, this is one of the reasons that Turkey is trying to play both sides, just to keep Europeans, keep the United States, just talk with Russians, because during this conflict, we've seen that they were sending drones to Ukraine to help Ukraine. And they, on the other hand, they were negotiating with Russians. And right now with these peace talks, they're interested in peace talks, but at the end of the day, the main goal is their economy. And
Yes.
how would this economy play out for Europe and Russia and the United States?
Well, obviously, Erdogan is looking at Turkey's best interest. And of course, he cannot ignore the Western markets if Turkey will become, the gas hub of Europe for the future, which, is quite probable. On the other hand, Europeans are, they have lost agency, basically. They have to do what the Americans dictate to them. And with the question with the Nord Stream 2 pipelines, we know that out of the four pipelines that were built, one of them is still intact. And the Russians said explicitly, Vladimir Putin said himself, it's the pipeline is there. All that the Germans have to do is to say, okay, we want to buy natural gas from you. the Germans have never even considered it, even though they need that gas and they can have it a lot more cheaper from Russians than from the Americans by ships. And they know that the Americans are taking advantage of the situation by selling them gas at triple and quadruple the rates of what the Russians are charging. But they have no agencies. They cannot make that decision on their own for their own benefit. So I think that Europe might have to hit rock bottom and come apart. And then maybe individual nations will have to renegotiate their association with their neighbors and with other regional powers, you know, like Russia and like Turkey. And at that point, I think that maybe we're going to see different kinds of developments on the old continent. But I know that also that the political class and their sponsors in the global banking oligarchy are going to do everything to escalate this war to a total war between Europe and Russia. They might not be able to succeed, but the wheels are already in place and they're already turning, and we see that they're allocating billions and hundreds of billions to the defense sector. That country after country is starting to slowly institute new legal arrangements to make conscription into the military obligatory, to encourage young men to join the army. So this process takes time. In Ukraine, it took 10 years. In Germany, in the 1930s, it took more than 10 years. But the process is being implemented. I only don't know whether it's going to succeed because people in Europe are already suffering a sort of war fatigue. I think that there's no enthusiasm for going to war with Russia. And I even know that the majority public opinion in most European countries is favorable to Russia. People are not afraid of Russia. So all this talk about, oh, when Vladimir Putin takes Ukraine, then he's going to move on to, Poland and Baltic states and Germany and who knows what. People aren't really believing it, and they don't believe their media either. So we'll see how it plays out. I think that the whole big war is not going to work out.
Yeah. In your opinion, how much of this dissatisfaction in Europe is coming from the conflict in Ukraine? Is all about Ukraine or something else is happening in Europe?
Well, I think that the people associate the economic collapse of Europe and the inflation with the conflict in Ukraine because, that's when the energy prices started to shoot up. That's when I think unemployment started to rise. That's the moment in time when the economic crisis became a lot more acute and people started feeling it more directly. Inflation took off in 2021. It started to be felt by the people over the coming years. And I think that people are aware of what happened with Nord Stream 2, the Russia sanctions, the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being wasted on this war effort, sending credit, sending money, sending military aid to Ukraine. So I think that the ordinary man on the street or woman are very much associating the crisis that they feel with their leadership's misadventures in Ukraine. And I think this is another reason for the general antipathy towards the whole war. And this is what caused the results of the elections for the European Parliament last 10 days ago to go as it did, all in favor of people who are against the war.
Yeah. Just shifting the gear to the conflict in Gaza, we know that recently the United States has offered Saudi Arabia with a defense treaty. And it seems that they want to normalize, they're asking for the normalization of the relationship between Saudis and Israelis. and they're trying to convince Saudis just to distance itself from China and the Chinese bases in Saudi Arabia. Do you think still Saudi Arabia, how do you see the current position of Saudi Arabia? Are they trying to buy time to be more associated with BRICS, to get more confident with what's going on within BRICS, or they're trying to manage both sides? They're trying to play play a game with both sides.
Well, I think that Saudi Arabia is in a relatively delicate position there, because it seems to me that the Saudi leadership is very much sick and tired of the Western powers and the United States. At the same time, they still sell a lot of oils to the United States and to Western Europe. So these are important markets for them. Not only that, but Saudi Arabia has a lot of money sitting with at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. I don't know exactly how much it is at the moment, but a few years ago it was something close to $800 billion. And so I think that they would like to not lose that money, not, so they cannot go frontal completely, prove themselves an adversary to the United States. They have to kind of try to play it softly. And I even think that some of these very strange projects that the Saudi Arabia is developing, like the Neom city, the line, and these various other futuristic projects that seem to be kind of in concert with the Great Reset and Build Back Better and so forth. I have the impression that they're doing it deliberately to be able to draw on all this money that they have in the West and build something at home, to get their own construction businesses and people employed, rather than letting that money rot at the Federal Reserve Bank and then get frozen and stolen from them. And so I think that Saudi Arabia will have to negotiate their transition from being a pro-Western power in the region to being a pro-multilateral world. I think that they're going to try to make that transition gradually and very carefully, right now, maybe they'll get some slack if Joe Biden loses the election and Donald Trump comes into power, and then they'll be able to deal with the Americans on a different, less ideological grounds and more pragmatic grounds. But I think at the moment there's definitely a risk in them completely rejecting loyalty to the Western powers.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great
Great
pleasure to
pleasure,
talk
Nima.
with you again.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. My warm greetings from Monaco to your viewers and listeners.
Yeah. You are my favorite commentator on what's going on in Europe. And it's a great pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Nima. Yeah, it's Europe is very strange. Europe is very strange. I think it has lost coherence. I think that maybe a few decades ago, maybe in the 1990s, 25, 30 years ago, people had a very positive idea about the European project, because they thought like, oh, we can travel everywhere and we're going to have one currency. And, you could see the upside. You can see you could go be Italian, but you could live in Austria or in the UK and vice versa. And so it all seemed very wonderful. But I think that the project is profoundly undemocratic. There's clearly some kind of an oligarchy which is defining how the project will develop. The parliament in Brussels is nothing but a debating society. The unelected European Commission has monopoly on writing the laws. They don't even know the laws that they write. It's all written by lawyers and lobbyists and so forth. And then all of a sudden, you have all these European directives that all the nations have to implement without any questions asked, and none of them make any sense. The systems that used to function well, you know, on the ground, when you're trying to navigate simple things like getting a bank account, like getting your driver's license extended, getting your passport, registering your children's for healthcare, all of these things that used to be, you know, bureaucratic but relatively straightforward. Now, a lot of them don't work at all anymore. You know, it's a mess, it's a morass, and you can't understand the rules. And it's all these copy-pasted European directives that even people who work in these bureaucracies don't quite understand. They can't help you. They understand that there's a problem, but they don't know how to fix it. So, and this is especially a problem in France. I mean, France, the French system is practically fallen apart. It's you know, the French people are very, very angry. And I know people close to the French military circles who are openly talking that it's practically inevitable that France will end up in a civil war, which, you know, I don't feel it. I'm in Monaco, you know, like I don't have so much contact with, you know, ordinary French people, but they do, and they say that it's the situation is very, very tense, and that, you know, military generals in France already sent a letter to Macron warning him that they're going to take him out. You know, not necessarily kill him, but take him out of power forcefully and replace him with a military rule. So, you know, and anything is possible. And so when these people like Macron and Scholz and Kaya Kallas and people like that think that they can just will the continent into war against Russia, they don't have the popular support. And without popular support, any plan, any agenda you might have is just not going to work. But there's going to be blowback, and who knows what we'll see. I think that, you know, give it another few years, and we could have you know, we can have Bastille days again in France, you know, and another French Revolution. Who knows? I mean, you know, the situation is now so absurd that you can't exclude anything.